The polar bear is the only animal in the world who actively hunts humans as part of its prey. Because of this, thousands travel from across the globe to get a chance to see one of these predators up close and personal. But for one of these tourists, making the trip into polar bear territory was the worst mistake of his life. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the tragic story of Matthew Dyer. Welcome to Final Affliction. Torngat Mountains National Park lies on the Labrador Peninsula in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Covering 9,700 square kilometers, the park is famous for its gorgeous snow-covered mountaintops and breathtaking wilderness. The park is home to many wild creatures, including wolves, golden eagles, reindeer, and of course, polar bears. The polar bear is undoubtedly one of nature's most refined killing machines, weighing over 750 kilograms of pure muscle and growing as far as 10 feet tall. An adult male can bite with a force that is equal to 1,200 psi, more than enough to crack a full-grown human skull as if it were an egg. Unlike his brown cousin, the grizzly bear, who will shy away from humans and only attack if disturbed or otherwise threatened, the polar bear is hyper-aggressive towards humans and is mainly a carnivorous animal. Most, if not all of his diet consists of meat that he usually hunts on his own. This basically means that the polar bear is a much more experienced hunter than his relative, so it's no wonder that the polar bears are among the select few of apex predators on planet Earth that have developed a taste for human flesh, and will go out of their way to actively hunt and eat humans if given the chance. Within the Arctic Circle lies the polar bear's native range, where it primarily hunts seals. But when seals are difficult to come by, these bears can survive off of eating just about anything, including fish, birds, rodents, and even human garbage. Additionally, polar bears have an acute sense of smell, which allows them to accurately track prey up to 1.6 kilometers away. This is the disturbing story of a nature-loving man who was unlucky enough to be on the receiving end of one of these beasts' powerful jaws, helplessly getting mauled as his ligaments tore and bones shattered while his friends could only watch in horror. Matthew Dyer was a 48-year-old lawyer living in Easton, Maine, who was obsessed with all things nature. He'd frequently spend his vacations going on hiking trips, his obsession with nature reaching a point where tattoos of various wildlife creatures were riddled across his body. This story began in the winter of 2012, when Dyer felt the urge to go on yet another grand adventure. As he was browsing through a magazine, he saw an ad for an outing to the Torngat National Park in Labrador, Canada. Matthew Dyer had never heard of it before, nor had he ever seen a real-life polar bear, but felt reasonably intrigued by what he read and decided to sign up for the trip after doing a bit of research. Before leaving on the trip, Dyer's main concern was that he wouldn't be in good enough physical condition. To make sure he could traverse the terrain, he trained all winter, carrying around a heavy backpack while exercising regularly. The journey to Torngat necessitates careful planning, registration with the park's officials, a lengthy approval process, and the carrying of appropriate equipment to ensure things go smoothly for all participants. Additionally, anyone visiting the park is obliged to view a DVD on polar bear safety. It's extremely easy to get lost in Torngat Park, as there are no roads, no campgrounds, and no directional signs indicating what to visit or where to go. Visitors are instead strongly advised to hire a certified polar bear guard not only for protection, but for guidance should they find themselves lost. Excited, Dyer later flew with a group of like-minded explorers from Montreal to a town called Kuujjuaq, which lies in northern Quebec. From there, the group made their way to a base camp, where a plane would arrive to hoist them over to the Torngat Mountains and eventually onto the coast of Labrador. The trip was led by two of the senior Sierra Club hikers, Sierra Club being a non-profit organization dedicated to conservation and education regarding nature and the wildlife that inhabits it. The first guide was 60-year-old Rich Gross, who originally worked for a low-income housing nonprofit in San Francisco. But since 1990, he'd spent a week or two each year acting as a tour guide on adventure trips all around the world. Accompanying him was a fellow tour guide, Marta Chase, a 59-year-old medical diagnostic consultant who'd been leading hiking trips ever since she attended high school. Tagging along with her was her husband, Kikab Castaneda Mendez. Dyer, being the nature-loving enthusiast he was, would have loved nothing more than to see a real polar bear in the wild, but he thought he'd be extremely lucky if he actually saw one. As a result, he was thrilled when tour guide Rich Gross suggested going on a hike that would almost certainly result in the group coming into contact with the park's population of polar bears. After hiking for a while, Rich announced now would be the time to set up a camp. The camp consisted of a few tents to sleep in, a cooking area to cook and store food, and perhaps more importantly, an electrified fence that stretched around the campground. A fence that was advertised as being capable of delivering an electric shock powerful enough to scare off any wandering predator, even though it was just powered by a couple of double D batteries, the same ones you'd likely find in a standard flashlight. The group knew the potential danger they were embarking on, yet they elected to hire a dedicated polar bear guard instead of opting to just carry around flare guns and bear spray. After going to sleep at around 10 p.m., the group woke up the next day early in the morning to the sound of one of their fellow members announcing that he'd seen a polar bear by the beach. Dyer quickly jumped out of his bed to witness the majestic animal. As he and the group made their way to where the bear was spotted, they soon saw a mother bear and her few-month-old cub only a few hundred yards away from where they set up camp. He was overwhelmed with joy. His eyes were fixated on the mother's every move, and he sat there admiring the creature's natural beauty, especially the young cub. Eventually, Gross announced it was time to head back to camp to have breakfast. After eating, they all geared up and went out to explore the mountains. They hiked through some of the most breathtaking views of nature. The icy lakes, the snow-covered mountains, the crystal blue water. It was all perfect. In the near evening, at about 4 p.m., they stopped near their camp and decided to relax for some time, as they were exhausted and their feet were sore due to the hours of hiking. As they hunkered down, Dyer spotted a dangerous figure 100 yards away that seemed to be stalking the group. It was a full-grown male polar bear, 10 feet tall, larger than any bear they'd ever seen. Compared to the female bear they had previously seen, this bear was twice as big and had a broader coat. It approached them slowly, putting out its tongue and sticking its nose in the air as if it were evaluating the two-legged creatures it had just come upon. They spared no effort to scare the bear away as it kept getting closer, grouping together to appear larger and more intimidating and making loud noises. However, this did little to stop the bear, who was now rapidly approaching them from less than 50 yards away. Rich had no choice but to pull out his flare gun and fire it at the beast. The animal continued to move closer to them as the flare was shot. However, the bear turned and raced off in a dead sprint when the shot landed in front of it, causing a second blast. Realizing the danger they had put themselves in by sitting down outside the relative safety of their camp, they quickly gathered their things and made a beeline back to their tents. The crew was ecstatic they arrived at camp since adrenaline was surely pumping through their bodies. Everyone appeared to believe the danger was over, except for Dyer, who was uneasy about the whole situation and felt the bear wouldn't give up that easily unless it had a plan. And as it turned out, it did, as the bear would be later seen a few hundred yards from the camp. Dyer and his team had established it would simply sit there for hours peering at the camp from a distance as though studying their behavior or looking for the easiest target. Gross wasn't concerned. "That's what the fence is for," he told the group. As much as Dyer's crew assured him that they were safe inside the camp, he still could not bring himself to fall asleep. So, Matt positioned himself outside of his tent and stared down the bear as it watched them while the rain poured down. He remained there for over an hour, gazing at the bear and being soaked by the gloomy gray sky as the day wore on before finally giving in and going to sleep. The crew spent the entire day of July 23 observing the bear with binoculars. The bear appeared calm and unthreatening, spending the majority of the day dozing off. Later that night, a group member by the name of Eisenberg decided to check up on the bear's whereabouts before dinner, but discovered it had mysteriously vanished from its original location and was now nowhere to be seen. On July 24th at 3:30 a.m., the group would be woken up by the sound of blood-gurgling screams coming from Dyer's tent. The electric fence was not enough to stop the 10-foot bear, who easily managed to break through it and reach Dyer. The unsettling shrieks startled Rich to wakefulness. He reached into his boot, close to his head, and pulled out a flare gun. He ripped the zipper off his sleeping bag and jumped from his tent. Marta Chase's tent was right next to Rich's. She was terrified when she heard the frightening growls of an adult polar bear coming from the tent next to hers as she made her way outside and peered through a small window. The bear looked enormous and white as snow, aside from the black on its eyes and snout. The beast ignored Rich as its eyes were fixated on Dyer. It ripped helpless Dyer from his tent by the head and began flailing his body around left and right like a rag doll, his sharp fangs tearing through flesh and slicing through bone, all while the group watched in utter disbelief. After Dyer stopped moving, the bear leaped over the electrified fence with Dyer's skull in between his jaws and made a run for it, likely hoping to reach the nearby beach where he could then drown his victim and enjoy his meal without disturbance. It was now 3:32 a.m. Even though it was pitch black, Gross and Chase could still make out the polar bear was running away with one of their traveling companions in its mouth, and things weren't looking good as Dyer seemed to have stopped yelling for help. Rich and fellow group members chased after the bear, with Rich firing and hitting the bear with multiple rounds of double flares, before the bear finally loosened his clamp on Dyer's neck and vanished into the darkness. When Rich finally reached Dyer's body, he was badly injured and unconscious. His jaw was crushed, his neck and lungs were punctured, he could barely breathe, and he was bleeding profusely. Rich attempted to radio for help but was informed that because the region was currently entirely shrouded in fog, there was no prospect of them receiving it till it was clear. The group tended to Dyer's wounds as best they could as they waited for rescuers to come save him. At 8:30 a.m., nearly 7 hours later, the clouds began to clear, and a reassuring sound of a helicopter engine finally echoed from afar and looked to be moving toward them. Matthew Dyer was promptly strapped to a carrier and hoisted into the chopper. From there, he went back and forth to various medical centers, with none being suitably equipped to offer the kind of care that he desperately needed. Upon arrival, doctors would re-administer sedatives previously given to Matt before patching him up again and recommending a different medical facility. Eventually, Matt would arrive at Montreal Center Hospital, where he would finally receive the care he needed. Medical reports regarding Matthew Dyer's condition were astonishing. The bones in his left hand were pulverized, both of his jaws were crushed, one of his lungs and part of his throat were punctured, and one of his vertebrae were broken. Yet, despite all that, miraculously, no vital organs or arteries were damaged, which explains how he managed to survive as long as he did. Even more shocking was that even though the 750-pound polar bear was flailing him around by the head, Matt managed to survive with his spinal cord largely intact. Matt's wife learned about the horrific incident and traveled to Montreal to be at her husband's side. On the 27th of July, doctors would inform her and Dyer's tourmates, who all came over to see how he was doing, that Matt's condition was stabilized and that he could be discharged in a matter of weeks. Fast forward to the present day, and Matt has made a complete recovery. His love for nature and the outdoors hasn't faded one bit. He even got a brand new tattoo of a polar bear to symbolize his life-or-death encounter with this ferocious predator. Matt's physical recuperation from the bear assault may have taken a while, and although his voice was left permanently affected as a result of an injury sustained to his vocal cords, he now feels emotionally stronger and all the more appreciative of the people who contributed to his survival. Very few animals, let alone people, survive an encounter with a full-grown male polar bear, especially not one who managed to clamp down on their heads with his powerful jaws. In the end, Matt probably survived off of pure luck, and his experience now serves as a constant reminder that nature and its wild creatures are not to be taken lightly. Any situation can turn nasty at any time, and before you realize it, you can be standing at the threshold of death, watching in horror as your grip on life crumbles before you, witnessing nothing but darkness after suffering your final affliction.